Nigerian Senate calls for adequate funding for the country's navy. NAFDAC destroys almost 2 trillion naira worth of tramadol this year. On the international scene, U.S. President Donald John Trump impeached by the House of Representatives. And in sport, NFL budgets $193 million for 2020.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Not often do we have stories involving the Navy, but today we do. The Nigerian Navy is 150 verses short of its need to be a top-notch operation. The Senate has taken note and wants to do something about it. The Red Chamber is calling for proper funding for the Navy so it would be able to acquire all the vessels it now lacks. The Senate says this would enable the Navy to fulfill its constitutional obligations. That call was made after the Senate adopted the report of the Joint Committee on Navy, Marine Transport and Finance during plenary. Committee Chairman George Sekibo, who presented the report, said the Senate had debated a motion on illegal security activities by Ocean Marine Solutions at the safe anchorage area of Lagos ports. He said the Senate had unanimously agreed to investigate the matter it says holds monumental security implications at Nigeria's seaports. The Senate says Ocean Marine Solutions should continue operations until a more cost-effective system is found. The Petrol Product Pricing Regulatory Agency is under investigation by the House of Representatives for alleged failure to pay to the federal government more than 1 trillion naira. The House Committee on Petroleum Resources Downstream has been mandated to investigate and report back within 10 days so further legislative action can be instituted. Two House members had accused PPPRA of withholding more than 1 trillion naira revenue generated internally. They say the PPPRA had failed to pay the funds into the federal government's consolidated revenue account at the central bank. They say that contravenes constitutional provisions. The House says in light of current economic conditions, the allegation is not only grave but worthy of investigation. There is an arrest warrant out for Adams Quinn, son of the late Michael Quinn, owner of Process and Industrial Development based in the British Virgin Islands. The Federal High Court in Abuja has issued the warrant in the case of the $9.5 billion award against Nigeria over alleged breach of a 2010 gas processing supply agreement. Justice Okon Abang issued the warrant on Wednesday after an EFCC application. This is said to be a part of the Commission's plans to secure Quinn's extradition to Nigeria to answer to EFCC's charges against him and another British national, James Nolan. Those charges include money laundering, tax evasion, and forgery of immigration documents. The central bank has said it will suspend bank accounts of corporations and suppliers who smuggle palm oil and its products into the country. Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele issued the threat while speaking on Tuesday at the inauguration of the Edo Oil Palm Program in Benin City. Emefiele said the central bank would also suspend accounts of those sabotaging government investments in reviving the palm oil sector. He said many of them hide under the ECOWAS Trade Liberation Scheme. Emefiele said the central bank has disbursed 30 billion naira so far to the palm oil sector under its Palm Development and Expansion Initiative. The National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, appears to have had significant success in its fight against the abuse of opioid palm pain medication, tramadol. The agency says it has destroyed more than 1 trillion naira worth of the addictive medication so far this year. NAFDAC says it will begin testing for imported active pharmaceutical ingredients before they are used to formulate drugs in Nigeria. NAFDAC Director General Professor Christiana Adeyeye revealed this at the Farmer Stakeholder Engagement in Lagos. The event was organized by the agency. Professor Adeyeye said NAFDAC has activated plans to ensure 60% local production of the country's pharmaceutical needs by 2020. The Department of Petroleum Resources has warned that we should all refrain from stockpiling petroleum products at home. It says we don't have to worry about fuel scarcity during this holiday season because there would be none. A Port Harcourt Zone Operations Controller Otoku Kangas gave this assurance at the annual general meeting of depot operators and petroleum product marketers. Okanga advised against panic buying of petroleum products. He said there is a high level of sufficiency that would last the nation for at least 3 months. Coming up, African stories. Ethiopia set to launch its first ever Earth observation satellite on Friday. And later, international news. U.S. President Donald Trump becomes third ever to be impeached.
I better go. I feel like saying the friend don't take time finish.
Push! When they're supposed to buy fuel, they will not buy. We look here. He still has 200 naira fuel. He will still buy.
Okay, to 200. You can put your usual bill.
Yes, but you go add 888. Join now.
It's a big level.
Is it not 200 you give that lady?
Now 888 be that.
888 now the new AWOOF. Recharge with star 888 star pin hash to enjoy 5 times AWOOF from MTN to call any network. You fit also enjoy am on top VTU. Just ask your vendor for AWOOF for you.
Conductor, where my 100 naira change?
Office man, you don't forget money sef.
Oh, forget. You go even add 888 join that shit. Give my change, bro.
Armed conflict and violence have terrorized the southern part of North Kivu province in the Democratic Republic of the Congo for many years now. Armed violence has intensified in the region in the last several months, negatively impacting humanitarian efforts. This has created a dire humanitarian situation and the displacement of thousands of people. In these conditions, worrying signs of malnutrition and sexual violence have surfaced. In the midst of these, many humanitarian organizations have left the region for safety. Now, MSF, an NGO that has been on the scene all along, is appealing to aid organizations to urgently return to Ebola-hit parts of the country to fill the glaring void in assistance from humanitarian organizations. MSF head of mission in DRC, Carol Jensen, says aid organizations are needed to help respond to an increasing number of medical and non-medical needs, especially in camps where he estimates nearly 700,000 displaced persons reside. Tunisia's Regional Union of Agriculture and Fisheries says citrus production is expected to decline by as much as 35%. Persistent high temperatures and diseases such as citrus black spot are wreaking havoc in citrus farms. Reporter Adnan Chawochi has the story.
Citrus forests enable extend over 20,000 hectares, mainly in the regions of Menzil Bouzelfa, Beni Khaled, Bouargoub and Slimane. Regional authorities explained this drop in citrus production by several factors, including the spread of the citrus tristeza, which has affected about 30% of crops, as well as the appearance of the citrus black spot disease.
There's a lack of agricultural supervision and early diagnosis of diseases in the main production regions. The farmers need more assistance to face the spread of diseases.
Also asserts that the decline in production is due to the effects of climate change.
This season is characterized by rising temperatures and the appearance of sirocco at the end of May 2019, at the time of flowering and bud development, which subsequently caused significant quantities of fruit to fall.
Agronomists argue that the decrease in production generally benefits the farmer, since the lack of supply leads to an increase in selling prices, while the achievement of a production of 500,000 tons in 2016-2017 resulted in considerable losses for farmers.
Farmers do not benefit from the rising prices. Only middlemen who control the market and take advantage at the expense of the farmers and the consumers. We lose money, but middlemen always make profits because they don't have any cost.
The citrus sector suffers from the problem of salinity of irrigation water and lack of water in general. The drop in production is also explained by the excessive use of chemical pesticides and the unstudied import of new citrus fruit species. Tunisian authorities are now preparing for the citrus and Maltese export season, which starts in the first week of January each year. This variety is among the best in the world in terms of quality and the high selling price in Europe and the Gulf region.
Ethiopia is set to launch its first ever Earth observation satellite on Friday. Its purpose is to monitor water, agriculture, climate, environment, and mining. Reporter Gideon Chala is in Beijing.
ETRSS-1 will soon join other satellites in orbit with an Ethiopian flag on it. Ethiopia's delegation, led by the Minister of Innovation and Technology, is already here in China to witness the launching of this historic satellite.
For me, it feels like in 1957 that the first ever man-made object was put in place, and that is Sputnik by the Russians in 1957. So for me now, I feel like that exactly. So this is the first ever Ethiopian satellite to be put in space.
Part of the delegation to China is also Ethiopia's head of Space Science and Technology Institute. He says the satellite to be launched will be highly instrumental for the country.
The purpose of ETRSS-1 are three important purposes. The first one is really to introduce our engineers with a new technology and transfer knowledge and technology to Ethiopia. And the second one is building national image and showing Ethiopia is able to explore space. We have an instrument that can explore from the ground into space using the telescope. Now from space into the earth. And the third one is since our economy is mainly based on agriculture, then this remote sensing satellite is used to analyze and bringing the different images of the agriculture and water management system, mining system, and environmental monitoring.
This microsatellite is not only the first of its kind for the Eastern Africa state, but also an historic eye-opener for similar missions coming up. Ethiopia is already holding talks with Chinese counterparts for a 6,000 kilograms communications and broadcasting satellite launch as soon as possible.
The next milestone that we need to celebrate is a 6,000 kilogram first Ethiopian communication satellite to be put again in space at an altitude of more than 38,000 kilometers on the geostationary orbit, and that's going to happen in 3 years' time. So the feasibility study and other research studies have already been conducted, and what is remaining is the financing part of the project.
ETRSS-1, the multi-spectrum microsatellite, is also motivating Ethiopian authorities to foresee the training of locals as future deep space scientists. The plan here is to send Ethiopian astronauts to space in a decade or a decade and a half time.
When we return, international news. U.S. President Donald Trump becomes third ever to be impeached. And later, sports. NFF budgets $193 million for 2020. Donald Trump has made history by becoming the third U.S. president ever to be impeached, and this sets up the trial in the Senate early in the new year to decide whether he remains in office. The House voted to impeach Trump on 2 charges: that he abused his power and that he had obstructed Congress. President Trump's Republicans control the Senate, so it is highly unlikely he will be removed from power. Democrats are already unhappy at the way the trial could be held. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she might delay sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate in order to bargain on the terms of the proceedings. The House voted 230 to 197 to charge Trump with abuse of power and 229 to 198 for obstruction of Congress charge. The abuse of power charge stems from Trump's attempt to pressure Ukraine to announce investigations into his Democratic political rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will announce by the end of this week the dates for the start of the Senate trial. Queen Elizabeth II says her government's priority is to deliver Brexit by the end of January. Of the more than 30 bills announced in the Queen's speech, 7 were on Brexit. Addressing Parliament for the second time in under 3 months, the Queen said the priority for her government was to deliver Brexit on January the 31st, but that ministers also had an ambitious program of domestic reform that delivers on the people's priorities. The 7 bills announced that were devoted to Brexit cover legislation on trade, agriculture, fisheries, immigration, financial services, and private international law. On the NHS, the government says it will enshrine in law a commitment on the health services funding. 13 miners have been rescued from a severely flooded coal mine in southwest China province after 86 hours. The accident happened at the Shamushu coal mine in the city of Yibin on Saturday afternoon. 5 miners died.
It's being hailed a miracle. 13 missing miners are found safe and sound after an 86-hour ordeal underground. They were trapped following flooding accident over the weekend. A mining company executive says the miners are in stable condition but still very weak. They are now receiving treatment in 3 local hospitals, away from media scrutiny. Gou Zhong was the general commander of the rescue mission. He attributes this life miracle to several factors, like enough water and veteran workers' mutual help. Equally important, rescuers tried their best to keep in contact with the miners by striking the pipelines as circumstances permitted.
There were 2 purposes for this. One was to make sure there were still signs of life. Then we tried to reassure workers by hinting that we hadn't given up on them and would try our best to rescue them.
Gou shares another detail. At around 3 a.m., rescue workers saw a plastic pipe floating from the area where the workers were trapped, with a note inside. Roughly translated, it signaled that they were not inundated but needed help.
Suddenly we saw a flash of light and then a person swimming towards us. Our rescuers rushed to him immediately and found that he was Li Guihua, their team leader. He told us 12 of his colleagues were still inside, alive but exhausted. He was extremely excited to see us.
During the marathon rescue, crews used various types of pumps to drain away large amounts of flood water. This was key to the success of the mission. Yet the whole process was full of challenges.
The situation in the mine was very complicated. Water continued to pour in the beginning, and the gas concentration was unclear. Besides, the tunnels were severely clogged by the facilities being washed down. This complicated the rescue work.
This accident has also exposed multiple loopholes in management of this mine. China's Emergency Management Ministry has required the company to investigate the problem and release the course as soon as possible.
Russia and China clashed with other UN Security Council nations over the delivery of humanitarian aid across borders and conflict lines to more than 1 million Syrians in many rebel-held areas. Sponsors of this year's aid resolution, Germany, Belgium, and Kuwait, circulated a draft that has been discussed for several weeks that would add a new crossing point in Turkey and extend cross-border operations for a year. Russia and China, allies of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, circulated a rival resolution on Monday that seeks to close the crossing points in Iraq and Jordan, leaving only 2 in Turkey, while not adding the third proposed in the rival resolution. It would also renew the cross-border operation for only 6 months. Russian Ambassador Abenzio Valizi said the sponsors' resolution has little to do with the real situation on the ground and is unacceptable, indicating Moscow would veto it if it is put to a vote. Up next, sports. NFF budgets $193 million for 2020. Please stay with us. The Nigeria Football Federation has earmarked 7.5 billion naira for the federation's 2020 total expenditure. Nigeria will be involved in 2022 World Cup qualifying series and the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers. The football body has also put on hold Nigeria's participation in international beach soccer tournaments until a creation and sustenance of a beach soccer league in the country are met. Togo coach Claude Leroy says FIFA's decision to play the 2021 Club World Cup in June and July could kill the Africa Cup of Nations. Leroy says the 2021 Club World Cup set to take place in China with an expanded 24 teams, new timing and format poses problems for Africa's showpiece event. Meanwhile, Cameroon is due to host the next African finals in June and July 2021.